You've dreamt of this moment, the day you'd stride proudly toward the stone walls of the castle where you've been invited to serve. The bards always said it was the pinnacle of human achievement, a monument of wealth, power, and permanence. This is no peasant's hut with a thatch roof ready to ignite at the first spark. No, this is fortress and palace rolled into one, impregnable, eternal, a monument to someone else's greatness. You picture soaring towers bathed in golden light, fluttering pennants in the breeze, and carved stonework glowing like ivory. You tell yourself that every discomfort of the road has been worth it. Finally, you've arrived at the stage where history itself is performed. A fairy tale setting, they say. Except, of course, the fairy tales conveniently leave out the stench. Your first whiff of the place knocks the shine off that dream. Before you even cross the drawbridge, the moat makes its introduction. From a distance, moats look noble enough, a silvery belt of water girdling the fortress. But up close, the truth arrives in waves thick enough to coat your throat. This defensive marvel doubles as the castle's latrine, its rubbish dump, and its natural breeding ground for every variety of rot. The water glistens, yes, but with a slick that could fuel lamps. Flies bob along the surface like buoys. What you mistook for drifting lilies turn out to be something less botanical, bobbing toward the reeds with quiet finality. You imagine charging knights in shining armour riding gallantly across, then stop, because no one willingly gallops within smelling distance of this broth. Romance, you begin to realise, was written by people who never had to breathe this in. You shift your eyes upward, desperate to reassure yourself that the majesty remains above the stench. The towers rise certainly, but less like heaven's fingers than like gravestones stacked in defiance of gravity. The walls don't gleam in sunlight, they weep. Moisture seeps from cracks between stones like sweat down an old man's back, feeding moss and lichen that gnaw away at the mortar. Far from noble ivory, the stone is streaked in soot, blackened from decades of indoor fires whose smoke never quite found its way out. Windows gape in irregular slits, more concerned with defence than daylight, their shutters warped by damp. You once believed castles commanded awe, now they resemble fortresses designed less for living than for holding out until starvation or surrender sets in. You try to console yourself with the notion that these walls at least will keep you safe. But safety here is relative. The castle is not so much a home as a barricade, a sign that your entire life is to be spent waiting for an enemy who may or may not appear, while the enemy already lives in your nose and lungs. The wind slaps your cloak against your legs, carrying with it the scent of smoke, damp earth, and something disturbingly sour that clings to the air like a guest who refuses to leave. You thought living here would mean sharing in grandeur. Instead, it scolds you with draughts before you've even touched the door. Even the approach feels less like a triumphant parade than a slow, awkward shuffle toward confinement. The drawbridge beneath your boots groans in protest, its planks worn soft from damp. The chains creak as though they might prefer to drop you in the moat rather than let you in. You tell yourself this is simply the sound of strength, but the illusion cracks when you notice rust the colour of dried blood coating every iron link. You begin to wonder if the true enemy isn't outside the walls, but embedded in them, creeping rot, mildew, and decay that steadily chew away at stone and wood alike. You had imagined castle walls to be eternal. Instead, they look like they need a carpenter and a miracle. As the gatehouse looms over you, you feel the oddest sensation, not of being welcomed, but of being swallowed. The portcullis hangs like a set of teeth above the entrance, waiting to snap shut. Light barely filters through its iron grid, and the passage yawns dark as a cave. You tell yourself that this is only your imagination. After all, this is the seat of power, and you're fortunate to live here. Yet the structure disagrees, Castles are never truly yours. You belong to them. They take possession of everyone who steps inside, binding you not with warmth or hospitality, but with obligation, cold stone, and a silence heavy enough to crush you. The men-at-arms standing by the gate hardly look impressed at your arrival. Their armour is dented, their faces weathered, their teeth visibly reduced in number. These are not shining paladins ready to serve. They're tired men earning stale bread by glaring at strangers. They bow only because they must, not because your presence inspires reverence. You thought proximity to power would mean admiration. Instead, it translates to suspicion. Every glance suggests they're already measuring how much longer they'll have to endure standing in this draft before the shift ends. The romance of loyal retainers shrivels before you even nod back at them. You glance once more at the towers, trying to picture the view from their heights. Surely, at least, the vista is magnificent. Yet even that reassurance frays when you remember the climb. Narrow staircases twisting upward, air choking with smoke, darkness broken only by flickering torches that drip fat onto your cloak. The idea of gazing over green countryside from a sunlit parapet is seductive. The reality of dragging your legs up damp stone while the echo of your own breathing follows you is considerably less so. This, you begin to understand, is what luxury looked like when no one had yet invented glass windows, chimneys that worked, or insulation thicker than a tapestry. The closer you draw to the entrance, the more the dream curdles. Fairy tales promised you a castle where minstrels played and banners fluttered. What you've been given is a massive, draughty box that inhales moisture and exhales mildew. The portcullis doesn't so much invite you as threaten you. The very walls whisper reminders of hunger, smoke, and damp, promising that every cough you develop here will be with you until the grave. This stronghold is not designed for comfort. It is designed for endurance. Yours optional, the castle's mandatory. You pause one final time on the threshold, perhaps hoping that some shaft of sunlight will suddenly catch the stone in a flattering angle, or that your imagination might manage one more fairy tale trick. But no, the clouds blot out the sky, the wind carries another sour waft from the moat, and the damp beneath your boots spreads like cold through bone. You look at this fortress and see not triumph but confinement, a monument not to life but to surviving just long enough to regret how little of it feels worth the trouble. And then at last, you step through the gates. You step beneath the shadow of the portcullis and into the courtyard, expecting the inner sanctum of majesty, a realm of order and ceremony. Perhaps you picture silk banners draped along tidy walls, nobles strolling serenely, and fountains playing gently under the morning sun. Instead, what greets you is mud. Not the polite kind of mud that merely cakes your boots after a walk in the fields, but a thick, churning stew of earth and dung that swallows each step with a sucking sound. Horses stamp and churn it deeper, chickens scratch through it for insects, and pigs wallow in the puddles as though this were their rightful estate. If castles were meant to symbolise refinement, then refinement appears to be ankle-deep and suspiciously warm. The air is its own battlefield. Every gust carries a different assault on the nose. The acrid sting of forge smoke rolls in from one side, competing with the ammonia tang of livestock pens. Add the sweet, sour bite of fermenting grain from the alehouse, and the unmistakable reek of manure piled against the walls, and you have a perfume far more pungent than rosewater. Somewhere in this mixture, a dog has found something dead to chew, while a stable hand tosses fresh hay that smells only faintly fresher than the animals standing in it. You once thought castles carried the scent of glory. In truth, they carry the unmistakable aroma of barnyard with a hint of blacksmith. Noise completes the ambience. To your left, a hammer clangs against an anvil in a rhythm that would drive saints to drink. Sparks leap and hiss while the blacksmith bellows at his apprentice, whose nervous fumbling ensures every second blow lands at the wrong angle. To your right, soldiers drill, stamping boots in unison, their shouts echoing against the walls. With such force it feels as though the castle itself has taken up barking orders. Behind you, a cow lows mournfully, chickens squawk, and a goat butts its horns against a post. Dogs weave between legs, snapping up scraps, and children add their shrill cries to the chorus as they dart recklessly through the mess. What you hoped would be an aura of dignified stillness has manifested instead as a carnival of chaos, conducted at full volume. You glance at the soldiers' training, hoping that at least this spectacle conveys some nobility. It does not. Their armour is mismatched, dented, and held together with leather straps that look one good tug away from surrender. They thrust spears into the air, bellowing like men possessed, though most strikes miss the straw dummies entirely. The instructor howls abuse, his voice ragged from years of trying to drill competence into men more accustomed to ploughing fields than facing armies. You are assured these men are your protection against invasion. You are less assured when one of them drops his sword in the mud and spends the next several minutes groping for it, like a drunk searching for his dignity. Even the animals seem unimpressed by the martial display. A pig waddles through the ranks, unbothered by shouted commands, while a chicken takes wing briefly and lands on a helmet. The soldiers do not stop. They are accustomed to this blend of training ground and barnyard. For you, however, the mixture of iron and manure, sweat and smoke breeds less confidence than queasiness. You begin to suspect that the castle's greatest weapon against its enemies is simply the sheer discomfort of standing near it for too long. The blacksmith's corner offers no reprieve. He toils shirtless despite the chill, muscles slick with sweat, and soot streaking his arms, his temper hotter than the forge. Every strike showers sparks, which his apprentice tries and fails to sweep away before they ignite something regrettable. You see piles of horseshoes, bent nails, twisted blades that never quite came out straight. This is the workshop that maintains your defences, and it resembles less a factory of precision than a junkyard with ambition. When your gaze lingers too long, the blacksmith fixes you with a glare sharp enough to cut steel, as though daring you to criticise his life's work. You quickly avert your eyes, preferring the safer company of livestock. The livestock, however, are no more gracious. Horses snort and toss their heads, their hides streaked with sweat and mud. Their stable reeks of damp straw, stale urine, and overworked beasts who have long since lost any illusion of noble bearing. Chickens dart at your feet, with murderous intent in their beady eyes, and the pigs grunt and shove one another for the privilege of lying in the filthiest spot. You once thought animals in castles were picturesque, noble steeds pawing the ground, doves cooing in lofts. In reality, they're noisy, smelly, and utterly indifferent to your sense of romance. You may have power over men, but pigs will always rule the mud. You had imagined strolling through the courtyard as though it were a stage, basking in admiration. Instead, you shuffle through puddles, trying to keep your cloak hem from turning a shade darker. Every step squelches, every gust of wind slaps you with a new odour, and every glance reveals another indignity. A servant trips while hauling water and drenches his own leggings. A dog steals a loaf of bread, and a goose begins a prolonged campaign of harassment against a child half its size. This is the noble heart of the fortress, a place where chaos reigns, dignity drowns in mud, and the only things thriving are vermin. You try once more to rescue the image in your mind. Perhaps the clamour proves vitality. Perhaps the smells testify to abundance. Yes, that must be it. This uproar is simply the heartbeat of a thriving domain. You repeat this to yourself like a prayer, though the words ring hollow as a bell. What is vitality when you cannot hear your own thoughts over the hammering, or abundance when most of it is ankle deep and steaming? Castles, you conclude, are designed not for tranquility, but for perpetual commotion. They do not cradle you in majesty. They jar you awake with the reminder that survival is messy, loud, and unrelenting. The people bustling around you show no signs of sharing your disappointment. Servants stride past with baskets of rushes, sacks of grain, buckets of water, faces drawn in concentration. They are accustomed to this ceaseless noise, this blur of animals and smoke. The castle has trained them to ignore discomfort, just as it will train you. They bow briefly in passing, not from reverence but from habit, their eyes already fixed on the next errand. You realise with a sinking heart that while this is your first day in the courtyard, for them it is every day, and will continue to be until their backs break or their hands grow too gnarled to carry loads. You might hope that somewhere in this din is a corner reserved for peace, a bench beneath a tree perhaps, or a fountain murmuring in the sunlight. No such luck. The only tree was cut long ago for firewood, and the only fountain is a trough where dogs lap noisily beside horses. Privacy is as absent here as serenity. Castles do not indulge daydreams of peace. They grind them into the mud until only duty remains. If you want quiet, you will need to invent it. And the only tool available is deafness. At last a steward approaches. He wears the kind of expression that suggests he's been inhaling this courtyard for decades and no longer notices the stink. He bows with the bare minimum of enthusiasm and gestures toward the keep. You are to come inside now, he says, where the true grandeur of the castle awaits. His voice is hoarse, his gesture perfunctory, but you cling to the promise like a drowning man to driftwood. Perhaps beyond these doors, the myth will finally catch up to the reality. Perhaps, beyond this mud-caked chaos, there lies a hall worthy of the legends. With that fragile hope, you follow him toward the heavy wooden doors. Behind you, the courtyard howls with life. Hammers, animals, servants, and soldiers, all adding to the cacophony. Ahead, the keep rises, its soot-stained walls offering no hint of warmth, but at least the illusion of majesty. You steel yourself for the spectacle that is promised, still carrying the faint dream of romance, despite every contradiction you've just endured. The courtyard has shown you mud and manure. Surely the great hall, you tell yourself, must offer something finer. The steward pulls open the heavy door, and at last you're granted your first glimpse of royal luxury. You have imagined this moment for years, picturing long trestle tables piled high with golden platters, tapestries glowing with the light of countless candles, noblemen conversing in low, dignified tones, while minstrels strum delicate notes in the background. Instead, what greets you is a wall of smoke so dense it feels like a second door, one that insists you choke your way through before you see anything at all. Your eyes sting immediately, tears forming not from emotion, but from the acrid embrace of poorly vented fire. Every breath carries not the perfume of grandeur, but the unmistakable reminder that chimneys, if they exist here at all, remain more theory than practice. You push deeper into the haze and the hall slowly reveals itself, though not in the flattering manner you had hoped. A great fire blazes in the centre, the smoke reluctantly deciding whether to rise or settle depending on the direction of the draught. It seems to enjoy lingering low, just at face level, where it can sting the eyes and coat the throat of every unfortunate guest. Above, blackened beams glisten with accumulated soot, the ceiling dripping with condensation that falls into the rushes below with a mournful plink. This is not the refined theatre of noble life you expected, but rather a cavern where the air itself feels exhausted. The sound is no gentler. The hall is a living throat, swallowing noise and vomiting it back louder. Retainers bellow at one another over the din, their words carrying less substance than volume. Dogs bark and snap beneath the tables, their claws clicking on the stone as they scavenge for bones, or scraps tossed casually by diners. Children cry or laugh shrilly, depending on whether they have managed to grab food or been cuffed away from it. Somewhere at the back, a drunken servant sings a song about a miller's daughter with more enthusiasm than accuracy, while a lute joins in, hopelessly out of tune. You had hoped for solemn majesty. What you receive is the soundtrack of chaos, punctuated by coughing fits as the smoke makes its rounds. Your feet sink slightly as you step further, and you glance down to see the rushes that cover the floor. At first, you mistake them for a quaint, rustic touch, straw scattered to soften the stone, perhaps even to lend a pastoral charm. Then your nose corrects you. These rushes are less decoration than dumping ground. Mixed in with the dry reeds are crumbs, bones, spilled ale, and the occasional suspiciously furry item you cannot quite identify. Servants are meant to replace them every so often, but the definition of often varies, and it is clear that recently is not the word that applies here. Each step releases a cocktail of aromas trapped beneath: sour beer, rancid grease, damp straw, and the faint ammoniac tang of animal accidents. Congratulations. You're walking across a compost heap, dressed as a carpet. At the tables, the food itself offers little more comfort. Platters of meat sit glistening with fat, though the fat shines a little too brightly, as though daring you to notice it has been warmed over more than once. The more pungent the spice, the older the cut beneath it, and here the spices practically leap off the table to announce themselves. You see trenches of bread serving as plates, already soaked with gravy and destined to be tossed to the dogs after use. Cheese wheels sweat in the smoke, their surfaces slick, while pitchers of ale give off a yeasty tang that suggests fermentation gone slightly rogue. The aroma of food mingles with the smoke, the rushes, the animals, and the sweat of bodies pressed together, creating a single, overwhelming perfume of survival. The diners themselves add another layer to the scene. Nobles sit at the higher table, their garments richly dyed but already bearing stains from the last meal. They speak loudly to assert authority, though their words dissolve into the general din. Lower down the hall, retainers and hangers-on cram together, their elbows colliding as they tear at hunks of bread or gnaw on bones. The dogs at their feet snapping up anything they drop. Servants scurry between, balancing trays while dodging stray kicks or the swing of an enthusiastic arm. You once imagined nobles dining in genteel silence, the only sound the clink of goblets. Here the soundtrack is the crack of bones, the barking of dogs, and the shouted command for more ale before the jug is even empty. The air grows thicker the longer you stand, and your clothes begin to carry the scent of smoke, like a second skin. You cough, drawing the attention of no one, for coughing is as common here as breathing. You blink through the haze and try to picture yourself standing near the high table, basking in reflected grandeur. The image collapses almost immediately, replaced by the realization that grandeur here is less about refinement and more about endurance. To survive the Great Hall is to prove you're hardy enough to sit through noise, stench and smoke without collapsing. You begin to suspect the true entertainment is watching newcomers like yourself wilt under the assault. In one corner, a jester capers, bells jangling as he performs some contortion that would be more impressive if half the audience weren't ignoring him entirely. His painted grin looks as weary as your own lungs. His jokes drowned out by the shouting. A pair of dogs wrestle over a bone at his feet, their snarls punctuating his punchlines. You wonder whether the laughter you hear is for him or for the dogs, but quickly abandon the thought. This hall does not specialize in clarity. It specializes in layers of distraction, where spectacle, noise, and odor conspire to erase any lingering notions of peace. You notice, too, the drafts that creep along the floor, curling under the tables like invisible snakes. Despite the massive fire, the heat never seems to spread evenly. Some guests roast in their wool, while others shiver, clutching their cloaks tighter. The fire burns for show as much as warmth, a demonstration of abundance. Yet its smoke consumes more air than its flames offer comfort. You imagine the castle lords boasting of their hearth, the centrepiece of their hall, and marvel at how pride can survive in conditions that make your eyes water and your teeth chatter simultaneously. Servants continue to dart past, their faces smeared with soot, their sleeves damp from spilled drink. One pauses to sweep the rushes, though the effect is less cleansing than rearranging. Another drags a bucket of slop toward the back, the smell trailing him like a herald. The dogs follow eagerly, tails wagging, knowing they will receive their share. You consider the hierarchy of the hall and realise the dogs, at least, are content. They bark, they eat, they sleep. You, meanwhile, are expected to mistake this squalor for majesty. You glance once more at the high table where the lord of the castle sits in what should be unapproachable splendour. His chair is larger, his meat fresher, his goblet heavier. Yet even here the smoke rises, the dogs circle, and the draughts creep. He coughs as much as anyone, squints through the haze, and wipes his greasy hands on the same rushes that cradle discarded bones. You realise then that grandeur in a castle is comparative. He eats better than his servants, yes, but he still eats in the same smoke, the same noise, the same damp. Power provides a cushion, not an escape. By now your eyes water so persistently that you can no longer tell whether the room is smoky or blurred by tears. The smell has woven itself into your cloak, your hair, and your lungs, and you understand that no amount of distance from the fire will free you from it. You remind yourself that this is the centrepiece of the castle, the room meant to impress the heart of majesty. If this is the heart, you dread to imagine what the extremities look like. Still, you cling to the notion that somewhere within these walls must be a sanctuary of comfort, a chamber designed for actual rest. The steward reappears, bowing stiffly as he gestures for you to follow. You are being shown to your personal quarters, your own private retreat. Surely these will offer the solace the hall cannot. Surely a chamber designed for a noble's rest will rise above the chaos, the smoke, and the stench. You cough once more, blink away the tears, and follow him down a narrow passageway, your boots echoing against the damp stone. The air somehow colder than in the hall, despite the blazing fire you just left behind. At last, he stops before a heavy wooden door, swollen from years of moisture and scarred by countless kicks from servants trying to budge it open when the hinges swelled. With a grunt and a shoulder shove, the door creaks wide, and you're invited to step into your personal quarters, the private sanctuary you've been clinging to in your imagination ever since the moat first offended your nostrils. You brace yourself for grandeur, perhaps expecting a bed draped in silks, a warm hearth glowing gently, and a chamber that proves castle life has some redeeming corner of comfort. Reality, as usual, slaps you harder than the draught that greets your face the moment you cross the threshold. The chamber is larger than a peasant's hut, certainly, but space means little when the air is as bitter as a January windstorm. The walls weep moisture, their stones slick with condensation that darkens the mortar. You can trace the damp trails as they snake downward, ending in little puddles that have stained the floor a mottled grey. The floor itself is bare stone, and the chill rising from it works its way through your boots with alarming speed, numbing your toes before you've even had the chance to sit. Tapestries hang along the walls, but they are thin, moth-eaten, and less insulation than decoration, fluttering whenever a draught sneaks in through the ill-fitted shutters. Far from warming the room, They only remind you how cold it would be without them, a thought more depressing than reassuring. At the centre of the chamber squats your bed, which might more accurately be called a wooden frame, begrudgingly piled with straw and covered with a threadbare blanket that has seen more winters than you would care to count. The straw crunches as you lower yourself onto it, releasing a faintly sweet odour of mildew mixed with something acrid. Almost instantly, your skin prickles with movement. You lift the blanket, and sure enough, the straw's alive with lice, fleas, and the occasional bedbug that has thrived for generations in this noble estate. They scatter when exposed, only to return the moment you replace the blanket. You remember tales of royal canopies and feather mattresses, and realise now they were likely written by someone who never once lay down in a real medieval bed. You shift uncomfortably, trying to imagine sleep here, and realise that even rest is a negotiation. The blanket, woven from a coarse wool, scratches the skin like sandpaper, while the straw beneath jabs through the thin layer in awkward clumps. If you try to cover your head for warmth, the air beneath quickly becomes rank with the smell of damp cloth and your own breath. If you leave your face exposed, the draught whistles across it, ensuring your nose will be as icy as your toes. There is no position that promises comfort. There are only positions that minimize the number of discomforts simultaneously. Luxury, it seems, is measured in degrees of misery. You might hope that at least privacy redeems this space, but the illusion vanishes quickly. The walls are thin, not in substance, but in design, carrying sound as though eager to share everyone's secrets. You can hear the steward muttering down the hall, servants laughing in the kitchen below, and the constant, muffled din of the great hall beyond. Worse still, you are not entirely alone. Castle life demands that retainers, servants, or guards often sleep nearby for convenience, and so your personal quarters may include several bodies bundled in the corners on pallets, their snores filling the chamber with a chorus of nasal misery. Even nobles with far more status than you find solitude rare. For someone in your position, it is nearly impossible. The castle swallows privacy whole, and spits out only the pretense of it. Every creak and rustle reminds you that castles are alive with sound at all hours. A door slams, a servant coughs, boots thump across the floorboards above, and the distant clang of the smithy persists even at night. The stone magnifies each noise, bouncing it through corridors so that you can never quite tell whether the shout you hear is outside or just down the hall. Sleep in such conditions becomes less about rest and more about surrender. Surrender to noise, cold, and the crawling itch of lice. You imagine noblemen nodding serenely in painted portraits, and then imagine them scratching themselves raw in the dark hours, hoping nobody noticed. You wander the room in search of warmth and find only disappointment. A small hearth crouches against one wall, but its flue smokes more than it vents, sending curls of soot into the chamber until your eyes sting. The firewood, damp from poor storage, sputters and hisses, filling the air with the smell of half-burnt sap. Instead of warmth, you gain another layer of smoke clinging to your cloak. The room seems designed less for comfort than for proving that you can endure discomfort better than those below you. After all, you are noble. Surely you must smile through your chattering teeth to set an example. Even the decor conspires to mock your expectations. A chest squats in the corner, its iron fittings rusted, the wood swollen from damp. When you lift the lid, it groans like a dying man, revealing nothing inside but the faint smell of mould and disappointment. A single chair leans against the wall, its joints creaking when you dare to sit, as though it resents the weight after decades of neglect. The room may technically contain furniture, but every piece feels weary, as if it has survived centuries, not out of craftsmanship, but out of spite. This is no chamber of luxury. It is a cave with accessories. It grows late, so you decide to sleep in your new chamber and continue the tour in the morning. As night falls, the temperature plummets and the drafts grow bolder. The shutters rattle against their iron hinges, letting in gusts sharp enough to extinguish the sputtering fire. You pull the blanket tighter, curling into yourself, the straw shifting beneath you with each movement. From the darkness, you hear the faint skitter of rodents exploring the corners, their claws clicking against the stone. They are bolder here than in the courtyard, for they know the food scraps from the hall eventually find their way into every chamber. You tell yourself they will keep to the shadows, but you feel the occasional brush of a tail near your palate and realise the castle belongs to them as much as it does to you. Morning promises little relief. When the sun rises, it barely penetrates the slit windows, the light filtered by grime until it resembles more of a grey smear than a beacon. The cold lingers, the lice have had a long night of feasting, and your joints ache from the stone-hard bed. You wake less refreshed than resigned, your body already bracing for another day of noise, smoke, and draught. The chamber does not replenish you. It drains you while pretending to shelter you. And yet this, you are told, is privilege. This is what sets you above the peasants in their thatched hovels. You wonder how often they laugh among themselves at the thought of nobles shivering in stone boxes, convinced they live in splendour. You shuffle across the freezing floor, your breath clouding in the air, and consider what other indignities castle life might still hold. You've suffered the smoke of the great hall, the mud of the courtyard, and the lice of your bed. Surely there cannot be much worse. Then the thought strikes you, sudden and unwelcome. Where in this entire fortress does one actually go to relieve oneself? You glance around the chamber, noting the absence of anything resembling a privy, and the sinking realization spreads through you like the cold in your bones. You're about to learn yet another lesson in how castles convert necessity into misery. There are questions you regret asking the moment they leave your lips, and in a castle, the most regrettable of all is, where is the toilet? You expect perhaps some clever contraption, perhaps a civilized seat hidden discreetly behind a carved screen. The steward, however, answers your inquiry with the kind of expression usually reserved for funerals. He leads you down a narrow corridor where the air grows steadily fouler, and you realise that whatever dignity remains will not survive the next few steps. Congratulations, you're about to be introduced to the medieval garderobe, the supposed solution to human necessity that manages to be both ingenious and revolting at the same time. The garderobe, in essence, is a stone cubby with a hole. You push open the small wooden door and find yourself staring at a slab of masonry with a circular opening, worn smooth from centuries of use. Beneath that opening lies not a pit of carefully covered waste, nor a channel of flowing water, but simply the open air above the moat. Yes, the same moat you admired from outside, already bubbling with refuse and buzzing with flies, now doubles as the final destination for every bodily function within these walls. You shift uncomfortably, realizing that to relieve yourself here is to join the collective chorus of smells already wafting back into the castle, carried upward by every passing breeze. If you once thought of the moat as protection, you now see it for what it is, an outdoor cesspit accessorized with defensive walls. The smell is omnipresent. It seeps through the floorboards, coils through the corridors, and never quite lets you forget its presence. On a windy day, the odour can spread like wildfire, announcing the garderobe's location long before you see it. Even the best tapestries and carpets cannot disguise it, though they do absorb it for years on end, creating a lingering perfume of rot that greets every visitor. You imagine telling yourself that this counts as indoor plumbing, but the sarcasm catches in your throat. Plumbing implies improvement. This is less improvement than organised surrender. The castle has solved the question of human waste, not by eliminating it, but by ensuring everyone has to live with it. Chamber pots offer no reprieve. Each room, no matter how grand, is equipped with a ceramic vessel tucked under a stool or bed. In theory, these pots provide convenience, sparing you the midnight journey through drafty corridors to the guardrobe. In practice, they provide a fresh reservoir of stench in the very chamber where you attempt to sleep. The pots must be emptied each morning, which means some unfortunate servant trudges through the halls carrying sloshing reminders of human frailty, praying they do not trip. When they finally tip the contents from a window, the castle briefly rains indignity upon whoever passes below. The phrase "don't look up" has never felt so urgent. For the servants assigned this task, it is a punishment masquerading as duty. They bear the risk of spills, splashes and slips, and the knowledge that no matter how carefully they carry their loads, they are still known by the smell that clings to them. In a hierarchy already defined by misery, they occupy the lowest rung, the ones who scrub the guardrobe stones with vinegar and ash, only to watch the stains and smells return within hours. If grandeur is measured by how far one is removed from filth, then castle life ensures that even its lords remain perilously close. Waste is democratic here. Everyone contributes to the moat, from the highest noble to the smallest child, and everyone suffers the consequences. You try to imagine what it must be like during a crowded feast day, when the castle fills with guests, hundreds of bodies, gallons of ale, and the same limited number of guardrobes. The lines stretch down the corridor, the smell intensifies, and the moat receives a tidal wave of contribution that would make even the most determined enemy army think twice about laying siege. You suspect that more battles have been won by stink than by sword. A besieging force might dream of cutting off supplies, but the defenders have already accomplished the more effective weapon, cutting off their own guests' will to live. Some castles, you're told, even built guardrobes protruding from the walls like precarious stone balconies. The waste drops freely down the sheer exterior, streaking the walls in unpleasant patterns that rain never quite manages to erase. Imagine leaning out of your window for a breath of fresh air, only to receive a reminder of your neighbour's digestive cycle. Romance, clearly, did not inform castle architecture. Pragmatism did, and its definition of pragmatic was point it downward and hope for the best. Even the word garderobe, which once meant a place to keep robes safe from moths, is an ironic twist. The smell was thought to deter insects from eating stored clothes. It did deter insects, yes, but it also deterred humans from standing too close. At night, the experience grows worse. The corridors are pitch black, torches guttering out, shadows shifting, and the drafts howling louder than your footsteps. Navigating to the guardrobe means braving cold stone, the scurry of rats, and the very real risk of missing your footing in the dark. Many instead choose to use the chamber pot, leaving the guardrobe for braver hours. You lie awake, listening to the sound of pots being filled, scraped, and occasionally overturned, and you wonder why anyone clings to the idea of castle life as refined. There is nothing refined about lying in bed while your neighbour's pot tips over. Even attempts at improvement often backfire. Some castles positioned guardrobes near kitchens for the convenience of servants. The result, of course, was that food preparation and human waste mingled in the same air, divided only by thin stone. The aromas were indistinguishable. On damp days, the steam from boiling stews blending with the sour stench from nearby shafts. It is difficult to cultivate an appetite when your nose cannot tell whether the odour is pork fat or something altogether less palatable. You begin to understand why medieval recipes relied so heavily on spices. Not to mask the age of the meat, as people often joke, but to overpower the entire olfactory landscape of the castle. You lean against the cold wall outside the guardrobe, trying to collect yourself, and wonder how anyone endured this daily assault. The answer, of course, is that they didn't endure it so much as they accepted it. People born within these walls never expected comfort. They grew up with the smell drifting through their play, their meals, and their prayers, until it was as natural as the sound of church bells. To them, it was life. To you, newly arrived and still nursing fairy tales, it is punishment. The moat outside your window will never again look like a defensive wonder. It will forever be a reminder of every indignity that passed through these holes. As you retreat from the guardrobe, you notice once again how the corridors themselves carry the stink. The air never clears completely, even on cold days when the wind blows sharp from the north. The stone absorbs the odour like a sponge and exhales it for decades afterward. Every tapestry, every wooden beam, every rush underfoot is a witness to centuries of waste. You realise, with a sinking heart, that the smell will cling to you as well, your cloak and hair absorbing it until you cannot escape. There will be no perfumed welcome for guests, no romantic stroll through clean corridors. There will be only the unmistakable scent of humanity, poorly managed and poorly hidden. You vow then and there to limit your contact with the guardrobe as much as possible. Better to hold your breath and endure discomfort than to face that stinking shaft again. Chamber pots, miserable as they are, at least keep you from balancing on a cold stone seat over open air. You follow your nose toward the kitchens, clinging to the faint hope that here, at least, the castle will redeem itself. Surely, this must be the heart of warmth and abundance, the place where feasts are born, where spits turn merrily, pots bubble, and the scent of roasting meat fills the air with promise. You picture minstrels singing while servants bustle happily, preparing golden banquets worthy of poetry. Your imagination still insists on grandeur because without it, what reasoner remains for enduring the smoke, the mud, the draughts, and the garderobes? If there is any oasis of comfort in this fortress, surely it must be here. But as you cross the threshold, reality once again smothers your optimism like smoke choking a candle. The kitchen is indeed warm, but the warmth is the suffocating heat of too many fires burning at once, their greasy smoke pooling against the rafters and pouring downward in waves. The air is so thick with vaporized fat that it coats your skin in an instant, leaving you slick and sticky. A cauldron bubbles angrily in the corner, spitting broth onto the stones, while spits creak under the weight of joints of meat that glisten more with age than freshness. The atmosphere is not abundance, it is punishment flavoured with ash. The smell confirms what the smoke obscures. It is not the mouth-watering aroma of savoury meats, but the acrid perfume of survival food disguised with desperation. The meat on the spits is dark at the edges, not from careful roasting, but from being held over the fire long enough to kill whatever lived in it before. Spices have been pounded into the surface so heavily that their scent masks everything else. A pungent fog of cloves, pepper, and garlic that tells you less about the wealth of the kitchen and more about the rancidness of the cuts beneath. This is not a banquet of delicacies. It is a burial for spoiled carcasses dressed up for one last performance. You step closer to one of the tables, where loaves of bread are stacked in rough piles. At first, they look solid enough, their crusts dark and cracked. Then you break one open and watch the interior crumble into a powdery mess with tiny black specks crawling as if the bread itself were alive. Weevils. You are assured that everyone eats them, that they add protein, that once toasted, they are hardly noticeable. You stare at the loaf in your hand and realise the line between bread and livestock feed is thinner than you imagined. To refuse is to go hungry, and so you're expected to chew stoically, smile grimly, and pretend you cannot feel the crunch that is not grain between your teeth. Nearby, a servant pours ale into a jug, the liquid sloshing with a sour tang that reaches your nostrils before the cup does. Ale is the drink of choice not because it's pleasant, but because the water is worse. It ferments unevenly, sometimes sharp, sometimes flat, always carrying the unmistakable whiff of yeast that lingered too long. Guests down it quickly, not to savour the flavour, but to dull their senses against the meal to follow. You sip cautiously, hoping for refreshment, and instead receive the taste of vinegar, with froth. The servant shrugs. It is the best on offer. This is castle abundance. Sour drink, spoiled meat, and bread that wriggles if you leave it too long. The servants who prepare it all move quickly, their faces streaked with soot, their hands raw from chopping and scrubbing. They stir pots large enough to drown a man in, scrape pans with knives already dulled from misuse, and haul firewood endlessly to keep the flames alive. Their movements are mechanical, without flourish or joy. No song lightens their labour, no laughter punctuates the smoke. They work to exhaustion, knowing full well the results will be consumed in minutes, and judged harshly by masters who do not understand how impossible it is to disguise rot with spice. If anyone deserves a feast, it is them, but they will eat last, gnawing scraps the dogs disdain. Even the architecture seems designed to trap misery. The kitchen is low-ceilinged, thick-walled and poorly vented. The smoke curls back downward, no matter how many small slits the masons carved for escape. The walls are slick with grease darkened by centuries of cooking fires that have left a patina you could scrape with a knife. The floor is uneven, worn smooth in some places, sticky in others, with the occasional puddle where a cauldron boiled over. Everything is coated in a sheen of fat, and the longer you stand, the more it clings to your hair and clothes. You will carry the smell of this room for days, whether you like it or not. On the chopping block lies a pile of vegetables, limp from storage, their skins wrinkled and their insides already softening. Carrots bend instead of snapping, onions sprout green shoots, turnips ooze faintly at their cores. These are boiled into stews until their forms dissolve, leaving only a thin, watery broth studded with lumps. Guests remark politely that the flavour is hearty. You know better. The flavour is the absence of anything fresh. The only truly vibrant taste is salt, and plenty of it. Used not for seasoning, but for preserving meat that would otherwise crawl off the table on its own. You chew each bite slowly, not because it is delicious, but because swallowing too quickly risks noticing what you're really eating. Dogs prowl here as well, their noses twitching as they snap up anything dropped. They fight each other for bones, knocking over servants, yelping and snarling in a scene that would scandalise any tale of noble banquets. Rats are bolder still, darting across rafters, scuttling along walls, and occasionally plunging directly into a sack of grain. The servants chase them with sticks, but for everyone killed, 2 more take its place. The castle's kitchen is not a sanctuary from vermin, it is their paradise. You have never seen such fearless rodents, fattened as they are by centuries of spilled ale and grain. You understand now why cats are prized here, though even the cats look weary, half-starved from the competition. The noise is relentless. Pots clang as they are dragged across stones, spits squeal as they turn. Servants shout to one another through the haze. The crackle of fire mixes with the whining of dogs and the hiss of boiling broth, a cacophony that leaves your ears ringing. You thought the courtyard was loud, but here the din is narrower, sharper, a constant assault in a confined space. There is no conversation, no pleasant chatter. Only the hammering of work and the occasional curse as hot grease splashes a bare arm. This is not a kitchen so much as a battlefield, where men and women fight against time, rot and fire itself. And yet, for all this labour, the end result is no banquet of legend. When the food finally reaches the hall, it arrives lukewarm, smoky, and suspiciously pungent. Guests tear into it, not because it delights them, but because hunger insists. They drink heavily to disguise the taste, then tell themselves afterward that they dined well. This is the myth of the castle feast, that sheer quantity and noise equal splendour. In truth, it is survival dressed in spices and served on trenchers of bread. The illusion persists only because no one dares to admit how unpalatable it all is. Better to toast loudly and chew quickly than to dwell on the truth. You take one more sip of the sour ale and feel your stomach churn in protest. The warmth of the room has become oppressive. The grease clings to your skin, and your lungs ache from the smoke. You long for something cool, something clean, something that does not taste of yeast or vinegar. The thought creeps into your mind, timid at first but growing insistent. Perhaps water would be better. Surely somewhere in this fortress, there must be a well or spring that offers relief. You imagine cool water slipping down your throat, washing away the taste of rotten ale, and yet, even as the idea forms, a flicker of doubt rises. The moat, after all, is never far away. The garderobes drain into it, the waste seeps beneath the walls, and the air itself smells perpetually of damp decay. If the kitchen has already betrayed you, can the water really be any kinder? Still, thirst overpowers reason. You decide that ale will not do, that you must seek something fresher, something purer, something that quenches. You turn from the smoky kitchen with determination, unaware that you are stepping from one misery into another. The well sits in the middle of the courtyard, a squat stone circle with a creaking wooden winch, the rope slick from countless damp hands. Servants line up with buckets, drawing water hour after hour, the stones around its base permanently dark with overflow. From a distance, it looks like a symbol of abundance, of the castle's self-sufficiency. Up close, it looks more like a trap. The water sloshes in the buckets, cloudy and faintly brown, carrying with it flecks of things best left unidentified. You catch the smell before you taste it, a faint sourness, the unmistakable tang of something that has no business being swallowed. You imagine plunging your face into a spring of cold clarity, and instead you're handed a bucket of liquid that smells faintly of the moat, and in truth, it is the moat's sibling. The soil around the walls is damp, perpetually soaked by the seepage of waste, refuse, and rainwater, carrying everything unpleasant downhill. The moat, already overburdened with its generous supply of human contributions from the guardrobes, leaches into the ground. The wells, dug deep though they may be, cannot escape contamination. The water tastes of decay because it is decay, filtered thinly through stone and soil. You gulp it down in desperation and spend the next hour regretting your decision, your stomach churning, your bowels threatening rebellion. What you once thought of as life-sustaining proves instead to be another form of slow assault. It is little wonder, then, that ale remains the default drink for everyone within these walls. Not because ale is pleasant, you already know it is not, but because at least the brewing process kills off some of the lurking threats in the water. Fermentation acts as a crude purification system, masking danger with alcohol and yeast. Even children drink it, their small hands clutching mugs of weak ale because anything is better than the water. You realise with no small amount of irony that sobriety is a luxury no one here can afford. The man who claims he has never touched drink is simply the man who is willing to risk dysentery instead. The illnesses spread quickly through this system, striking rich and poor alike. Dysentery, typhoid, and other nameless fevers circulate every season, leaving even the most powerful noble doubled over on his rush-strewn floor. There is no escape, for every drop drawn from the well carries risk. and every sip is another roll of the dice. The castle becomes a breeding ground for disease, a place where survival hinges not on the strength of the walls, but on the resilience of the gut. You find yourself longing for a simple mountain stream, clear and cold, but here, enclosed by stone and moat, you must drink what everyone else drinks, and pray your body endures. And pray you must, because the symptoms arrive swiftly. Stomachs cramp, bowels empty with alarming speed, and the smell of illness joins the already overburdened atmosphere of the castle. Servants stagger through corridors, pale and sweating. Nobles retreat to their chambers to suffer in undignified silence, and the garderobes overflow with reminders of the water's treachery. Doctors mutter about imbalances of humours, priests warn of divine punishment, and everyone quietly admits that the well water is killing them, but continues to drink it because there is no alternative. It is the perfect circle of misery. The water sustains life, and in sustaining it, it undermines it. You watch a servant scoop a bucket for herself, her face impassive. She sips with the resignation of one who knows what is coming and has accepted it as the price of existence. You take another cautious sip yourself, hoping perhaps your stomach has grown stronger, only to find the taste worse than before, an earthy bitterness that lingers on your tongue like regret. You realise the moat is not only outside the castle walls, but inside you now, flowing through your veins, a permanent reminder of where you live. You try to swallow this truth, but it sits in your gut heavier than any meal. The irony, of course, is that castles are supposed to be places of protection. They were built to withstand siege, to hold out against starvation and thirst. Yet even in times of peace, you find yourself under siege, your health battered by the very thing meant to keep you alive. If the enemy army does not starve you, the water will poison you instead. It is a contest between men with swords and microbes, with patience, and the microbes never lose. The moat, meant to repel attackers, has instead infiltrated the well, ensuring the enemy lives within the walls forever. This knowledge gnaws at you with every drink. You begin to ration your sips, stretching them out, convincing yourself you are less thirsty than you are. You tell yourself you can endure the sour ale if it keeps you from the worst fate of the water. But thirst is relentless. It builds slowly, dulling your thoughts, tightening your throat, until finally you give in and dip another cup from the bucket. It is a daily surrender, a grim ritual of compromise where you choose survival over comfort and discomfort over death. There is no winning hand here, only a series of bad options played endlessly. You pause beneath the looming battlements, trying to convince yourself that here, at least, the castle redeems itself. If nothing else, the walls are impressive, thick, towering, unyielding. They rise like cliffs carved by human ambition rather than time. From the outside, they seem eternal, promising safety and strength. From within, you can trace the width of the stone, pace the length of the corridors, and tell yourself that no army could breach them without years of siege. The walls are the castle's boast, its reason for existing, its proud declaration that here you are untouchable. You should feel reassured, standing beneath their shadow. Instead, you feel smothered. The closer you look, the less reassuring they become. Damp clings to every surface, soaking through the mortar, darkening the stones, until they shine slick in the torchlight. The walls are not dry barriers against the world, but sponges, drinking in every drop of rain, every mist that rolls across the fields. In winter, the moisture freezes, spreading cracks like veins across the surface, while in summer, the damp releases in heavy, humid breaths that make the corridors reek of mould. You run your fingers across the wall and pull them back wet, a reminder that the very stones meant to protect you are slowly dissolving beneath your touch. The mould itself is a tenant that pays no rent and takes no orders. It creeps along the corners, blossoms in green and black patches behind tapestries, and thrives wherever air grows still. In dark stairwells, it spreads unchecked, staining the stone like bruises. The servants scrub at it with lime and vinegar. Their hands raw from the effort. Yet it always returns, stubborn as the drafts. You imagine trying to hold a feast with banners fluttering proudly, only to have guests coughing from the spores, drifting invisibly through the air. Mould does not respect power. It blooms for lords and beggars alike, decorating their lungs long before their tombs. The cold, however, is the true master here. In winter, the stone itself turns against you, leaching heat from them every body, every fire, every attempt at warmth. The hearths blaze day and night, yet the walls greedily absorb their heat, leaving the chambers icy no matter how much wood you burn. You can wrap yourself in furs, bury yourself beneath blankets, sit so close to the fire your skin threatens to blister, and still feel the chill radiating from the walls behind you. It seeps into your bones, numbs your fingers, stiffens your joints, and whispers that this fortress was never meant for living. It was meant for enduring, and endurance is never comfortable. On stormy nights, the problem shifts from cold to water. Rain seeps through cracks in the battlements, drips from ceilings, trickles down staircases in small rivulets that freeze into treacherous sheets of ice by morning. Buckets line the corridors, not to collect spilled ale, but to catch the steady drip of leaks that have mocked repairs for centuries. You stumble in the half-light, your boots skidding on damp patches, your cloak heavy with moisture. The walls do not keep out the elements, they merely relocate them, channeling water in unpredictable patterns until every room contains a reminder of the storm outside. When you lie down to sleep, you hear the steady plink of water in buckets, a lullaby of inconvenience that never ends. In summer, when the sun finally arrives, the walls offer little relief. Their thickness traps the heat, turning the interiors into ovens. Air stagnates in the narrow passages, the stone radiating warmth long after the sun has set. You sweat through your tunic as if you'd marched for miles, the air heavy with the combined stench of bodies, smoke, and damp stone baking in the heat. What was cold and cruel in winter becomes suffocating in summer. The castle ensuring that no season passes without discomfort. You begin to suspect the walls exist less to repel enemies than to guarantee misery for those already inside. You wander one of the passageways, marvelling at how the walls themselves seem alive. They drip, they breathe draughts, they echo every sound with cavernous glee. A cough in one corridor travels like a ghost through three others. Footsteps multiply, bouncing off the stone, until you cannot tell if someone approaches or merely passed an hour ago. Even silence has a presence here, pressing down so heavily it feels like a weight on your chest. The walls amplify every sensation, magnifying discomfort, erasing privacy, and reminding you constantly that you are surrounded on every side by stone. They do not feel like guardians. They feel like jailers. Occasionally, you climb the stair to the top of the battlements, telling yourself that perhaps the view will justify the imprisonment. From there, the countryside does indeed stretch wide and green, dotted with villages, fields and forests. But the moment you turn back toward the keep, you see nothing but grey bulk, towers rising like tombstones, arrow slits glaring like hollow eyes. The walls from above look less like triumph than like a massive cage, a reminder that you live inside a structure designed for siege, not for comfort. You can see the peasants' cottages below, smoke curling gently from their thatched roofs, and for a brief moment you envy them. Their walls may not withstand a battering ram, but at least they do not weep on their occupants. The servants mutter that even the rats know how to exploit the walls. They scurry through cracks, nest behind loose stones, and emerge in the dead of night to raid storerooms. You hear them in the darkness, scratching and squeaking, their tiny claws tapping against the mortar. The masons may have built walls to repel armies, but rodents breach them with ease, conquering quietly, one crumb at a time. You realise then that impregnable is a relative term, that the enemy does not always arrive in armour. Sometimes it arrives with whiskers and a hunger for grain. Still, the lord of the castle will proudly insist that these walls are his strength. He will gesture toward their height, boast of their thickness, remind you of the sieges they have survived. He will speak of the generations who laboured to raise them, of the masons who cut each stone, of the armies that broke against them. He will not mention the mould, the damp, the rats, the draughts, or the buckets. To him, the walls are a monument of permanence. To you, they're simply another reminder that life here is less about glory than about managing discomfort. Yet you nod politely, because to argue would be to admit that you regret every step you've taken since crossing the drawbridge. And then inevitably comes the reminder of what these walls are truly for. They're not here to keep you comfortable. They are here to keep you alive when the enemy appears. You are told of the importance of vigilance, of watchmen patrolling night and day, of soldiers drilling in the courtyard, of stores being counted and recounted to ensure survival. Every draft, every drip, every shiver is excused by the promise that these inconveniences are the price of safety. You do not live in a castle for ease. You live in a castle for war, and war demands constant preparation, constant labour, constant sacrifice. You notice it everywhere once you begin to listen. The endless activity required to keep this cold fortress even marginally habitable. A castle does not run on majesty. It runs on back-breaking work, performed by hundreds of bodies who rarely appear in the songs or legends. Their footsteps echo through every corridor. Their voices murmur at every turn. Their hands keep fires lit, food boiling, waste carried, and walls standing. You thought life in a castle was about commanding loyalty. In truth, it is about watching exhausted people labour without end, and realising that the stone you once admired is only held together by their misery. Servants form the largest, least visible class of inhabitants. They rise before dawn, stumbling through icy halls to gather firewood, haul water, and stoke hearths that never seem to warm more than a few square feet of space. Their hands are cracked from frost and fire alike, their shoulders permanently bent from carrying logs and buckets. You see them scrubbing floors on their knees, with rags dipped in grimy water, scouring soot from stone walls, only for new smoke to settle an hour later. They sweep rushes already soaked with beer and grease, rearranging filth into less obvious piles. For every one task completed, another immediately appears, as though the castle itself delights in mocking their efforts. When it comes to waste, their burdens grow worse. Chamber pots must be emptied daily, carried down staircases and across courtyards with steady hands, lest the contents splash over boots. Buckets from the garderobes must be scrubbed with vinegar, the smell of ammonia rising like punishment. These servants become invisible not because no one sees them, but because no one wants to acknowledge their work. To admit how much they do is to admit how filthy the castle is, how precarious the line between civilization and squalor. You begin to understand why noble poetry rarely mentions them. They are reminders that majesty is built upon muck. The guards, meanwhile, spend their days drilling in the courtyard, their boots stamping in unison, their spears rattling in the air. From dawn until dusk they march, shout, and clash wooden weapons, the sound reverberating against the stone until it feels like your skull is part of the training ground. They spar in dented helmets, their breath clouding in the cold, their curses filling the air. When a blow lands harder than intended, you would like to imagine them as stalwart knights, shining in polished steel, but the reality is sweat, mud, and bruises. They train not for honour but for endurance, because in a siege they may spend months on these same stones, waiting for starvation to prove a sharper enemy than any sword. Artisans and craftsmen contribute their own layer of noise. Hammers pound constantly in the smithy, iron shrieking as it is beaten into shape. The wheelwright shaves timber. The carpenter saws planks. The stonemason chips away at repairs that never end, because damp stone never truly heals. Every hour of the day carries some new clatter, some fresh echo. It is a symphony of survival. Though not one anyone would pay to hear, the rhythms are not ordered like music but chaotic, colliding into one another until the air is thick with the sound of strain. If you ever imagined peace in a castle, you quickly realise it does not exist. Even silence here is temporary, shattered the moment someone drops a bucket or slams a door. What strikes you most is how thinly stretched everyone is. Servants collapse on benches for a few moments' rest, only to be summoned again. Guards limp after training, their boots worn thin, their stomachs growling as they gnaw on crusts of bread harder than stone. The blacksmith curses his apprentice until his voice cracks, then coughs up black phlegm before returning to his anvil. Children are pressed into service early, fetching tools or carrying messages, their thin arms trembling under loads too heavy. There is no corner of the castle untouched by fatigue. The grandeur of its walls and towers exists only because countless bodies spend their lives propping them up. Even the nobles cannot escape discomfort. You might think their privilege shields them, but the truth is only relative. They eat meat instead of porridge, wear furs instead of coarse wool, and recline on straw mattresses instead of bare pallets. Yet they too cough in the smoke, shiver in the draughts, and scratch lice beneath their fine clothes. They pace the same damp corridors, climb the same icy stairs, endure the same unrelenting clamour of labour. They may command others, but their comforts are paper-thin compared to the myth. Nobility in a castle does not mean ease. It simply means suffering slightly less than everyone else. The hierarchy is everywhere, yet it brings little solace to those at the top. Your place in the hierarchy may be above the servants, but their noise and labour surround you constantly, reminding you that your authority is little more than proximity to someone else's power. You cannot eat without smelling the sweat of the cooks, cannot sleep without hearing the guards on patrol, cannot pray without a craftsman's hammer interrupting your devotions. Your power is real only on parchment. In daily life, you are trapped in the same cycle of labour, smoke, and clatter. You realise that castles were not designed for peace, but for constant motion, constant vigilance, constant noise. Their grandeur was never meant to soothe. It was meant to remind you that survival requires unending effort. As the day drags on, you try to find a quiet corner, somewhere to rest your head without interruption. Yet every corridor offers its own reminder of toil. Servants sweep past carrying bundles of firewood. Guards stomp by in formation, their spears clacking against stone. Somewhere nearby, a door bangs open and closed as kitchen boys run errands. Even when you close your eyes, the sound remains, etched into your ears, vibrating through the stone itself. The castle is alive with labour, its heartbeat loud and relentless, and you cannot escape it. At night, the labour only shifts form. Servants shuffle through corridors with buckets of slop. Guards take up their watch on the battlements. The blacksmith cools tools for the next day. The castle never truly rests. Even as others sleep, the machinery of survival grinds on, powered by the hands of those too tired to complain. You lie awake, hearing the footsteps, the clatter, the whispers, and realise that quiet is a luxury as distant as comfort. The walls may protect you from invaders, but they will never protect you from noise. It dawns on you then that castles are less fortresses than hives. Each person within them is a worker, buzzing, toiling, carrying, hauling, hammering, sweeping. The queen bee might sit at the high table, but she coughs in the same smoke as the drones. The grandeur you once admired was simply the result of endless work, poured into stone that does not care whether it stands for beauty or for burden. The castle is not majestic because it is noble. It is majestic because it consumes human lives without end, grinding them down until only the walls remain. And now, as you lie in your chamber, listening to the endless footsteps echoing through the corridors, you realize the truth. Castles are never quiet. They do not allow peace. The noise gnaws at you constantly, seeping into your bones, reminding you that your life here will never be serene. The walls may keep out enemies, but they will never keep out the clamour of work. Morning in a castle does not begin with gentle birdsong or the soft toll of a bell. It begins with the clatter of iron on stone, the bark of dogs already awake, and the groan of gates being dragged open for the day's work. The sun may not yet have climbed above the walls, but the noise rises eagerly to take its place. You lie on your straw mattress, blinking in the dim light that creeps through the shutters, and already the day is clamouring for your attention. The castle does not believe in silence. It greets every hour with racket, as though afraid that quiet might breed too much thought. From the courtyard comes the unmistakable pounding of the smithy, a rhythm that drives itself into your skull like a second heartbeat. The blacksmith is already at his forge, hammer striking metal in uneven intervals, sparks hissing as they leap across the stones. The blows echo through the corridors, magnified by the walls, until it feels as though the entire fortress is being struck with each swing. His apprentice scurries about, clattering buckets, tripping over tongs, adding to the music of chaos. The smithy is the castle's metronome, a reminder that labour is never ending, and it beats out its reminder at a volume that demands your attention, whether you asked for it or not. Not to be outdone, the dogs take up their chorus. They bark at each other, at the servants, at the livestock, at the wind. They snarl over scraps, yelp when kicked aside, and whine for food with persistence that pierces even the thickest of walls. Their claws scratch across the stone floors. Their panting fills the air, and their presence is as constant as the drafts. These dogs may guard the castle, but they are just as likely to keep you awake at night as to protect you from an intruder. They add a ceaseless soundtrack of growls and howls to every hour of the day. Then come the soldiers. Their shouts rise sharp and guttural, echoing from the courtyard as they drill with spears and swords. Commands barked at top volume rebound off the walls, so that one order multiplies into three, bouncing down corridors and through windows until it feels like an entire army is screaming at once. Boots stamp in rhythm, spears clatter against shields, and wooden practice swords thud against straw dummies. There is nothing dignified or majestic about it. It is the sound of men trying not to embarrass themselves while their instructor roars at their every mistake. The walls amplify their effort, carrying it into every chamber, so that even nobles attempting to rest cannot escape the noise of training. Children too add their shrill notes to the mix. They run through the courtyards, chasing one another, squealing when they fall into the mud, wailing when a goose snaps at their legs. Infants bawl in their mother's arms, their cries rising above the din like trumpets demanding attention. In a castle, childhood is not hushed. It is loud, public, and ever-present. Their cries join the hammering and the barking and the shouting, a cacophony that reminds you constantly that you're never alone, never granted a moment of peace, never permitted to believe in quiet. And always, underneath it all, the animals contribute their own voices. Horses whinny in the stables, stamping their hooves impatiently as they wait for feed. Pigs grunt and squeal, fighting one another for the choicest scraps thrown their way. Chickens cluck and squawk, their feathers flying as they flap into rafters or scatter underfoot. Cows low with a deep, mournful sound that reverberates through the courtyard. Even the geese, those self-appointed sentries, honk with a ferocity that can startle the unprepared into dropping whatever they're holding. The castle is less a noble residence than a farm with walls, and it never lets you forget it. The bells punctuate this chaos at intervals, not to provide order, but to add yet another layer of noise. They toll to mark the hours, to summon prayer, to call soldiers to arms, or simply because someone has decided it is time to remind everyone that time is passing. Their clang reverberates through the stone, vibrating in your chest, drowning out even conversation. Bells are meant to unite the community, but here they merely join the orchestra of racket, reminding you that your life is measured in noise as much as in days. Even indoors you find no relief. Doors slam in the draughts, hinges creak, footsteps echo endlessly down stone corridors. Servants shout to one another as they haul water, their voices competing with the splash of buckets and the scrape of wood dragged across floors. In the great hall, laughter bursts out in sudden drunken waves, punctuated by coughing fits as the smoke thickens. The kitchens roar with the hiss of boiling cauldrons, the scrape of knives, the curses of cooks. There is no room in the castle where sound does not intrude, no chamber insulated enough to spare your ears. Silence is not an option, it is a fantasy. Privacy is the first casualty. Every word spoken is overheard, carried by echoing walls, mingling with the clamour until your secrets are as public as your meals. You may whisper in your chamber, but footsteps pass outside, and laughter leaks in, and the scratch of rats reminds you that even vermin are listening. The castle is designed to keep out enemies, but it cannot keep out noise. You are never alone with your thoughts. You are always accompanied by the hammering, the barking, the shouting, the crying, the braying, and the bells. It gnaws at you, not with sudden violence, but with steady persistence, until you long for the simple silence of a peasant's field. You begin to notice how the noise wears people down. Servants shout not because they wish to, but because it is the only way to be heard over the din. Soldiers bellow louder than necessary, less from zeal than from habit. Children grow up accustomed to raising their voices just to reach their parents' ears. Everyone strains to be louder than everyone else, creating a cycle of rising volume that never resolves. In such a place, calm voices are not respected, they are ignored. Authority itself is measured in decibels. The louder you shout, the more likely someone will obey. And yet, for all its irritation, the noise is also a reminder of the castle's dependence on movement. Each clatter and shout signals labour, survival, preparation. The castle must be loud because silence would mean failure. The forge gone cold, the soldiers idle, the servants asleep, the animals unfed. In this place, sound equals life and quiet equals danger. You tell yourself this truth to keep from despair, but it does little to soften the headache. The realization that your well-being is measured in how much racket surrounds you does not make the racket easier to bear. This is your home now. You tell yourself that you'll get used to it all. It will just take some time. Time passes. Months have bled together in this fortress of smoke and stone. The novelty of castle life, if ever it existed, has long since evaporated into draughts and damp. You have endured the mud of the courtyard, the choking haze of the great hall, the lice-ridden straw of your chamber, the stench of the guardrobe, and the sour bite of spoiled ale. Your body has grown thin, your lungs raw, your skin itchy from fleas and mould. In time, even endurance frays. Perhaps it is an infected cut from brushing against rusty iron, or a fever that refuses to break after drinking from the well, or a cough that worsens in the damp air. until your chest rattles like a drum. Whatever the cause, the day inevitably arrives when you're told that you must see the barber surgeon. It is not a suggestion. In the castle, illness is not private, it is communal, and your weakness is everyone's problem. You are led to a chamber that was never designed as a hospital, but has been repurposed into one out of necessity. The air is thick with smoke, and the metallic tang of blood, the walls blackened by torches that sputter in their sconces. A bench smeared with old stains serves as a table, and on it lie tools that glisten faintly in the dim light. Knives of varying lengths, a saw not unlike the one used by carpenters, a row of curved irons heating in the fire until they glow red. There are no polished instruments, no gleaming surfaces, no gentle hands. There is only crude efficiency and the knowledge that pain is the price of survival. You wonder if perhaps you would have been better off keeping your sickness to yourself, but it is already too late. You are here now, and the barber surgeon has noticed you. The man himself does not inspire confidence. His hands are scarred, his apron stiff with dried blood, his face soot-streaked from hours bent over the fire. He may shave beards and trim hair when the castle is at peace, but in moments like these he becomes something closer to an executioner. He grins at you with the weariness of someone who has performed the same brutal routines too many times, then gestures for you to sit. The bench is hard, the straw beneath it filthy, and the smell rising from it makes you gag. You realise you're not the first to occupy this seat, and you will not be the last. The stains on the floor confirm as much, dark patches that no scrubbing has managed to erase. If your ailment is fever, the first treatment is leeches. The barber surgeon pulls them from a jar of cloudy water, their bodies writhing as though eager for their meal. He places them on your skin, and they attach with a bite sharp enough to make you flinch. They swell as they feed, your blood pumping into their slick bodies until they writhe with grotesque satisfaction. This, you are told, balances your humours. You are expected to believe that draining your strength will cure your weakness, that the removal of blood will restore vitality. When the leeches are finally plucked away, you are left with small wounds that continue to ooze, and a dizziness that leaves you staggering. It is difficult to feel healed when you can barely stand. If your problem is infection, the approach is even crueler. The barber surgeon takes a knife, blackened with use, and cuts into the swollen flesh to release the pus. The smell is immediate, foul and sour, filling the chamber until even the torches seem to flicker in protest. He squeezes with both hands, forcing the corruption out, his grip unrelenting despite your cries. There is no consideration for comfort, no thought of sterilisation. The pus spills onto the floor, mingling with the old stains, while your vision blurs with tears. The wound is then packed with a rag steeped in wine or vinegar, the liquid burning like fire, searing pain that makes you bite your lip until it bleeds. You tell yourself this is necessary, but necessity feels indistinguishable from torture. When bleeding and lancing fail, there remains the cautery iron. Heated until it glows, the iron is pressed directly against your flesh, the hiss of burning skin filling the room along with the stench of charred meat. The pain is total, obliterating thought, reducing you to screams that echo off the stone walls. You writhe, restrained only by the hands of servants who pin you down, their faces expressionless from too much practice. The iron sears shut the wound, or so you're told, but in that moment it feels as though your entire body is aflame. When it is over, the skin is blistered and blackened, and you are left trembling, sweat-soaked, your heart racing. You're told to be grateful, for the cautery has saved you from worse. Gratitude, however, is difficult when your flesh still smoulders. In the worst cases, when limbs are shattered or infections spread too far, there is the saw. It rests casually on the table, indistinguishable from a carpenter's tool, its edge jagged, its handle worn smooth. The The barber surgeon grips it with practiced ease, as though cutting flesh were no different than trimming timber. There is no anaesthetic beyond a cup of strong ale or a leather strap to bite. Once the sawing begins, the sound of metal teeth grinding through bone fills the chamber, a noise that reverberates in your skull long after it stops. The stump is cauterized with the same glowing irons, the screams of the patient lingering in the air long after their voice breaks. Some survive the ordeal, many do not. Infection waits patiently in the corners, ready to undo whatever crude salvation the saw has offered. You sit in this chamber and realize that medicine here is not healing, but endurance. It does not cure so much as it tests how much pain you can withstand before you break. Success is measured not in recovery, but in survival, in whether you live long enough to limp back to your chamber. The barber surgeon does not promise wellness. He promises only that he will try to keep you alive until the next problem arises. You find yourself longing for ignorance, for the bliss of untreated sickness, for the quiet certainty of decline rather than the loud brutality of treatment. But in the castle, you are not permitted to choose. Your suffering is communal. Your illness a threat to all, and so you are dragged here whether you wish it or not. Around you, the chamber echoes with the reminders of others who have endured before you. The rushes on the floor are dark with stains, the walls scratched with fingernail marks where desperate hands clawed during pain. The air is heavy with the smell of smoke, blood, and rot, a perfume of misery that seeps into your clothes, your hair, your skin. You leave the chamber not lighter, but heavier, burdened by the knowledge that you will return again. Everyone returns eventually. No one escapes illness in the castle, only postpones it. The barber surgeon wipes his hands on his apron, already calling for the next unfortunate soul, while you stagger away, clutching your wound, your ears still ringing with the hiss of burning flesh. You are weaker than when you entered, but this, they assure you, is progress. This is health. You limp back toward your chamber, your body trembling, your spirit frayed. For a moment, you wonder whether death might have been kinder. But even death here is not private. It is paraded through the halls, mourned quickly, and replaced immediately. There is no dignity in suffering, only the relentless grind of it. The months following your visit to the barber surgeon leave their mark. You survived the ordeal, but survival is not the same as recovery. Your body never feels quite whole again, your strength sapped by bleeding, your skin scarred from cautery, your joints aching in the damp. You carry the faint rattle of a cough that refuses to leave, the itch of lice that seem to multiply faster than your patience, and the exhaustion of nights broken by draughts and noise. You are not dying, not exactly, but you are never entirely well either. Life in the castle ensures that everyone, whether servant or noble, lives in a state of permanent half-sickness. And so, when the weight of weakness presses heavier than usual, you do what others do. You drift toward the chapel. It is supposed to be the one place where silence reigns, where the heart is lifted, where faith transforms suffering into salvation. You clutch this fragile hope as you step into the dim interior, already suspecting you're about to be disappointed again. The air inside is thick, not with sanctity, but with smoke. Candles gutter in iron sconces, their wax running in rivulets down the holders, hardened into layers from years of repetition. The smell is a mix of tallow, incense, and damp stone, clinging to your throat in a way that feels less divine than suffocating. A crucifix hangs above the small altar, its surface darkened by centuries of smoke, until Christ himself looks less like a saviour and more like a shadow. The walls, bare and unadorned, drip faintly with moisture, as if even here the dampness insists on reminding you that stone never offers warmth. This is not a place of serenity. It is another chamber of the same castle, wearing a different costume. The priests shuffle about in their vestments, garments stiff with age, patched and repatched until they resemble quilts. More than robes. Their eyes are heavy-lidded. Their faces pale from the same draughts that bite at everyone else. Their voices hoarse from years of chanting and smoke. They do not welcome you with warmth or compassion. They nod curtly, gesture to a bench, and continue their muttered prayers. To them, you're not a soul in need of comfort, but another body to be reminded of sin. You sit, the stone beneath you, cold as ice, and wait for the solace that refuses to arrive. The service begins, not with song, but with warning. The priest's voice rises, echoing against the walls, declaring that suffering is the will of God, that pain purifies, that misery on earth is but the shadow of eternal torment. You came hoping for encouragement, and instead find yourself reminded that death is certain, hell is waiting, and every discomfort you endure is merely a foretaste of the punishment you deserve. He speaks of sin with relish, listing them with the precision of a merchant tallying debts, and assures you that everyone in this hall has earned their portion of suffering. You shift uncomfortably on the hard bench and wonder if anyone has ever left here feeling lighter. The chanting follows, monotonous and endless, a drone that rattles in your ears until you cannot tell where the words end and the drafts begin. The priests intone in Latin, a language you barely understand, the syllables tumbling together into a kind of ritualized thunder. The smoke from the incense coils upward, mixing with candle fumes, until your eyes water and your throat burns. You cough, drawing disapproving glances from those around you, as though your lungs' rebellion is itself a moral failing. Faith here does not soothe, it suffocates, demanding endurance as proof of devotion. You glance at the faces beside you and see the same resignation written on them. Servants kneel with hands clasped, their fingers cracked and raw from work, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. Soldiers bow their heads, still stinking of sweat and rust, muttering prayers not for salvation, but for survival. Nobles sit stiffer, cloaks drawn tight, pretending dignity even as their lips tremble, with the same fear as everyone else's. In this chapel, rank disappears, replaced by the universal certainty that everyone is guilty, everyone is fragile, and everyone will die. It is the closest thing to equality the castle has to offer, and it comes dressed as condemnation. The priest continues, hammering the theme of eternity. He assures you that this world is temporary, but the next is forever, and forever will be far worse if you do not repent. You are told to be grateful for your hunger, for your illness, for your pain, because they remind you of the wages of sin. To question this suffering is to question God. To seek comfort is to admit weakness. You begin to realize that religion, in this castle, is less a balm than a weapon, a tool to keep everyone bowed, everyone resigned, everyone convinced that misery is not only inevitable, but righteous. Occasionally, a hymn breaks the monotony, but the voices are cracked, tuneless, more moaning than music. The children's voices waver, the adults growl, and the sound bounces off the stone in a dissonance that makes your teeth ache. There is no harmony here, no uplift, only the collective groaning of people forced to sing about joy they do not feel. The words promise heavenly bliss, but the sound delivers only earthly fatigue. You join half-heartedly, your throat already raw from smoke, your voice blending into the dirge like another stone dropped into a pit. Confession offers no more relief. Kneeling in a dark alcove, you mutter sins you barely remember committing, while the priest reminds you that even thoughts can damn you. Your penance is more prayer, more kneeling, more words mumbled into the cold air. You leave no cleaner than you entered, burdened now with the suspicion that you have failed even at confessing properly. If this is forgiveness, it feels suspiciously like another chore. Outside the chapel, nothing changes. The drafts are still sharp, the food still rancid, the bed still crawling, but now you carry the added weight of sermons that tell you not to resist these miseries, but to embrace them. You are told to see each flea bite as a blessing, each cough as a gift, each hunger pang as a reminder that God loves you enough to test you. Comfort, it seems, is for the next world. This one is for groaning in the cold until your soul is sufficiently purified. In time, you learn to dread the chapel, not because it is uniquely unpleasant, but because it offers no escape from what you already know. You came seeking meaning, but meaning here is always the same. You are guilty, you must suffer, you must endure. The flicker of candles, the monotone of chanting, the sharp smell of incense, they are simply the castle's daily miseries rearranged into liturgy. You leave each service colder, smokier, and more tired than before, wondering whether God himself would choose to sit in such a place for long. Years pass and the castle that once loomed over you like a monument to eternity begins to show its true lifespan. The first changes are subtle: a damp patch on the ceiling, a bit of mortar flaking from the walls, a faint sag in the timbers of the roof. You ignore them at first, convincing yourself that stone and wood simply carry the scars of age, that the structure is too mighty to fail. But castles, like the bodies trapped within them, are mortal. Time eats at them in slow, patient bites, and you come to realize that the fortress you once imagined as everlasting is crumbling beneath your feet faster than you ever expected. The roof leaks with every rainstorm, no matter how many times servants scramble to patch it with thatch or tar. Water seeps through cracks in the stone, dripping into buckets scattered across halls and corridors until the castle sounds like a cavern filled with constant rain. You fall asleep to the rhythmic plink of water striking wood, a lullaby that grows no sweeter with repetition. Each morning, you wake to fresh puddles spreading across the floors, turning rushes into sodden mats of rot. What was once an inconvenience becomes an infestation of damp mould climbing the walls in sprawling black blooms, clinging to tapestries, curling the edges of parchments. The castle no longer merely houses you, it consumes you, swallowing comfort and replacing it with mildew. The wooden beams that once groaned under the strain of stone now sag visibly, their surfaces dark with rot, riddled with worms that chew with quiet persistence. Carpentry is attempted, of course, but repairs in a fortress are never-ending. For every beam replaced, another bends, another splinters, another caves inward under the burden of centuries. The staircases creak ominously, their treads hollowed by countless feet, and sometimes collapse without warning. You tread them carefully, holding your breath as though that might lighten your step. The very bones of the castle betray you, and you wonder how anyone can call this place eternal when its skeleton collapses before your eyes. The towers, once symbols of pride and strength, now serve as nests for vermin. Rats scurry up the winding stairs, their sharp claws echoing on stone, their eyes gleaming in torchlight. They breed faster than the cats can kill them, gnawing at grain stores, burrowing into walls, and darting across corridors at night. You hear them scratching in the rafters as you try to sleep, their squeaks overlapping with the incessant drip of leaks. And if rats are not enough, the towers also host bats, their leathery wings flapping in the gloom, their droppings staining the floors. They cling to the ceilings in clusters, squealing as though mocking your attempt at rest. The towers were supposed to inspire awe. Now they inspire dread. Few dare climb them after dusk, and those who do return, with the smell of guano clinging to their clothes. Halls that once resounded with laughter and music grow silent, not from peace but from abandonment. The great hall, choked with smoke and filth, is used less often, its benches warped by damp, its banners shredded by moths. Guests who once endured its chaos drift away, unwilling to brave the discomforts for the sake of ceremony. Lesser chambers stand empty, doors shut against draughts, their floors layered in dust, their windows cobwebbed. The castle shrinks not in size but in spirit, contracting into fewer and fewer habitable spaces, while the rest dissolve into ruin. What was once a hive of noise and activity becomes a shell of itself, echoing with memories rather than voices. Outside, the walls themselves betray their decay. Cracks spiderweb across their surfaces, stones loosen and tumble to the ground, leaving gaps wide enough for weeds to sprout. Rainwater seeps deep into the mortar, freezing in winter, prying the stones apart with each thaw. Servants are sent to patch the gaps, but their work is undone with every season. The castle slowly yielding to nature's patience. Moss creeps up the sides like a slow green tide. Ivy snakes across towers, roots prying at joints with more determination than any battering ram. You once admired these walls as the ultimate defence, now you see them for what they are. Temporary monuments, losing their battle against weather, time, and neglect. The sound of collapse is no longer rare. A beam splits with a crack like thunder. A stone crashes from a parapet. A section of roof caves in under heavy snow. Each crash sends shivers through the household, a reminder that the castle is less fortress than ruin in progress. Servants mutter that the building is cursed, that the stones themselves hunger for the lives of those within. You laugh bitterly, knowing there is no curse here, only the steady hand of entropy. No fortress, however grand, can withstand centuries without surrendering piece by piece. The Lord's wealth, once poured into walls and towers, dwindles with each repair. Coins vanish into carpenters' hands, masons' fees, timber purchases, and still the castle decays faster than it can be maintained. You notice ceilings patched with mismatched planks, walls propped with awkward beams, towers sealed off entirely rather than fixed. The great dream of permanence falters in the face of dwindling resources, and the fortress reveals its truth. Castles are less eternal than the songs suggest, their grandeur only ever as strong as the coffers behind them. And coffers, like beams, empty and break. What makes the decline most cruel is how ordinary it feels. No dramatic fire, no conquering enemy, no catastrophe to mark the moment of ruin. Instead, it is the slow drip of leaks, the quiet gnaw of rats, the subtle shift of stones, the smell of mould spreading room by room. The castle does not collapse in a single tragedy. It erodes in silence, until one day you look around and realise that the fortress you once thought immortal has already half vanished, leaving only fragments of its promise. Its grandeur lingers only in memory, in the words of bards who never had to sleep beneath its rotting beams. And you, once so eager to step through the gates, now stand amid the wreckage, tallying your regrets. You recall the stories of majesty, the dreams of banners in sunlight, of power carved in stone. What you received instead was damp and smoke, rats and draughts, sermons of suffering and medicine that hurt more than it healed.